most technology is built around processes. So if you don't follow processes, you'll fail even bigger. Few people in the company knows the process. What do you feel like what stops these operators from understanding these challenges?
Some of this stuff moves so fast, right? It's kind of like, you get a client that's like, relatively small, and then all of a sudden they blow up, right? And it's like, whoa, okay, like we got to keep up with them, right? Or like we're gonna lose them. So a lot of times I see that as like it's like an all of a sudden like, whoa, like we need to move like very quickly. And then it's kind of like, all right, well, because we move so quickly, like, we forgot some of these things in between.
Some of the 3Ps assume that they're the brands have already knows everything, right? Like you said, but most brands they don't come from supply chain or warehousing background. I mean,
on the 3PL side, like there's certainly education that needs to happen for the brands, the clients to like, okay, well, how do you really work with the 3PL? How do we work, and how do we help you grow and, make this a successful product by supporting you from like the infrastructure perspective?
We have Kevin today with us, and thanks a lot, Kevin, again for joining me and being the volunteer for my first one, and making me feel better. So, just a quick intro about the series. So, execution at scale is pretty much built for 3PL operators specifically, and with little over decade I've spent in 3PL space, I've seen some patterns and always thought that there is limitation of content regarding real life scenarios. Most of the times when we are at trade events, etc., we are passing by each other or having lunch or having a coffee, we have real life conversations, but most of the things on the stage are more scripted by that per se, or
Sure.
geared towards A, B, and C, not as much as real life issues. So this is my initiative, try to see if that brings in value to our community. That's my initiative, I guess. And we have Kevin here. A lot of you might already know Kevin. For those who don't know, he has pretty much worked up from the floor. So he has been in the operations in real days, real time, real problems. Now he runs New Warehouse podcast. He started in 2019, has about little over 1,000 podcasts, right, Kevin? Like 1,000.
Not quite at 1,000 yet. I think we're around somewhere between 750 and 800. So
Yeah,
almost.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so almost there, almost there. This could be, you can add this to yours, right?
yeah. Let's get us to 799. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's also a professor, so we should probably I call him a professor. We should call him Professor Kevin, I guess. He teaches supply chain course, so that's he has a very I would say a broad spectrum of understanding of the supply chain space, and along with 3PL space specifically. So that being said, over to you, Kevin. I would just like to ask, what made you kind of start New Warehouse Power podcast, and what kept you going, right? With uh, as I see behind you, warehouses are sexy, but most people
Yep.
think they are boring. So I would love to know from you.
Who thinks they're boring? We gotta challenge that. No, the first off, thanks so much for having me on, Vic, and happy to be your first guest, and I love that you're doing this. Like I mean, I love to see other people like tackling things like this, and joining the kind of podcasting world and making more of these discussions happening. So very honored to be the first guest, really. So thank you. Um, yeah. So where did this idea come from, and why talk so much about warehouses, right? Really, I mean, as you said, right? I mean, I started, in warehousing kind of unexpectedly. I actually started as a temp in the inventory control department for a book publisher, and that's really where like I first even learned about everything that happens within a warehouse and how all these things kind of take place. And that was not my formal education or what I went to school for, or anything like that. Not even supply chain in the broad aspects when I went to school, which is interesting because you mentioned I'm a professor. I now teach supply chain at the same school that I graduated from. So, so it's a very kind of odd turn of events in my life. But yeah, so I started in there, and it was something that it was like, okay, I need a job, and that's what I was able to find. And then from there, I just kind of continued to grow and really got the interest in operations and warehousing. I think, the one thing probably when I look back on it, like what was attracting me to it, or what was like making it interesting to me besides like, just the job, right, in a sense, was just a kind of ongoing constant problem solving of it, right? It was not necessarily like the same thing every day. Like there were different kinds of issues to deal with. There were different ways to improve the operations, different ways to explore things, and dive into the data and really figure out like, okay, well, why does this happen, right? And like, why does this physically happen, but like this in the system happens and it doesn't match up? And like, how do we resolve that, and how do we keep that from happening? Like how do we actually find like those root causes? And I think that's kind of really what maybe hooked me in a little bit more. And then a couple years into it, I was kind of like, well, I think maybe this is going to be like my career for a while. So I need to learn more about this industry, right? Like I want to be able to grow within it. I want to know like what are other people doing, and those types of things. And I was searching for something like to learn from that was easily digestible, and couldn't find it, right? Everything was like kind of, all right, well, you got to go and get a certification, or you got to go like back to school. And I didn't want to do that, right? I
Yeah,
didn't have the time to do that then, and wasn't in that mindset of doing that. And I was looking for something, online that was like easy to digest, and couldn't find it. And I had done some kind of work on the side, like creative projects. I actually had a radio show that was about real estate at my alma mater, so had a little experience on the microphone prior to this podcast, and I'd done some freelance writing too. So my initial thought was like, oh, I'm gonna write about warehouses. I'll do like a blog about warehousing, and then quickly was like, well, I have no time to sit down and write, and I have no time
yeah,
to sit down and write, and then also edit, and then also just figure out how do I even like get this out into the world. And luckily, I had a boss who he hired me 3 times, right? So we got pretty close. Like he would leave the company, and then he'd give me a call a month or so or later, and he's like, hey, I want to bring you over here.
yeah,
And he really like kind of pulled me into the warehouse and really gave me like a lot of that experience. He actually was I think he was guest number 2 on the podcast, if anybody wants to listen to him. But he actually was like, oh, you know what? Because we were close, right? So I'd been talking to
yeah,
him about this idea, and he's like, oh, I hear podcasts are like becoming a thing. Like, have you ever thought about what about a podcast? So I was like, oh, okay. And I had never listened to a podcast before. And I was like, sounds easier. Sit down and talk, right? And that's about it. Like so I'm like, okay, maybe that's the idea. So finally like committed to it and decided to do it. And it was really like selfish reasons, right? I wanted to just learn more, and I figured like, okay, well, this is a way to talk to other people and have them, kind of teach me some things. And then over time, I guess it resonated with other people, and I would meet some people at conferences, or they would reach out to me and be like, "Oh, like this is like so helpful to learn about this industry because I'm trying to figure it out too." And I quickly realized like, oh wow, there's a lot of other people that are wondering like what can they do in their operations too, like what is possible inside their 4 walls. And so that kind of like continued to motivate me to keep going. But back then I was kind of like, did I think I would be doing this podcast like 7 years
yeah,
later? Like, absolutely not. Like, there was no like future vision of this thing, right? It was just like really like, okay, well, let me do something that's like a little creative outlet, but also like will help me like grow and learn more in the industry and network a little bit more. Yeah, and it's been a blessing, definitely, that it's been able to grow to where it is, and that it's and it's helped and educated so many people, which I think is fantastic, because it's kind of like, I feel like it whenever I'm interviewing somebody, I'm on the podcast, I'm like, all right, like, let me think about this in like the Kevin mindset of
yeah,
2018, where I'm like, where I'm like, what is possible inside my four walls? Like, what am I not aware of? Like, what other solutions can I do, and those types of things. And I think that that really resonates with people. And yeah, and I've been lucky to be now doing it like full time for the last 3 years. So that was really kind of like, why did it start? And then ultimately, like, what was the catalyst to kind of keep going and continue the momentum and help the industry in some way?
Amazing. And it's funny enough, like you said, like quite a few things there which I can resonate with, like at this
Hmm.
moment, because I started this series and this is our first episode, right? And
Yeah.
I did like for the same purpose. I was like, okay, let's make a 5 episode series and see where it goes. And I wanted to write a lot as well, like which I did like 4 or 5 years back. Uh, but one thing, which I told you, like when we spoke a few days back, I am about to launch a book though. So you talked about
Hmm.
being in
Astray.
publishing and everything. So, but yeah, it's wonderful, having the conversations and the biggest thing about possibility, which you talked about. I think that is what I see the most as well, because a lot of people who turn operators, especially when we look at the small to mid-size 3PL space, they are operators turned entrepreneurs, right? Like they could be a warehouse supervisor. Now they
Hmm.
started a 3PL and like overall juggling with all the business problems along with trying to find out operational efficiency or even problems with like hiring, etc. So that those are definitely real life challenges. And so that kind of to switch gears now to like kind of topic and
Sure.
related to that, right? Like so this is exactly what I wanted to ask you first, is that while you have talked to so many people, like you have talked to like smaller warehouses, bigger
Hmm.
warehouses, enterprises, software companies, technology providers, automation providers, like all over in this space, right? So what are some of the things, if you combine all your conversations together, what would you say are top three things, let's say, which becomes a problem when a 3PL is scaling? So when they're going from let's say a $2 million revenue mark and they are going towards 20 million, like what happens in that ecosystem and what are some of the challenges they face?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, like, to your point, like, I've talked to small, large, all different sizes, and I think that's, that's one of the fantastic things about this industry. I think is that there's such a wide spectrum, right, of 3PL providers, but then also such a massive, offering of solution providers as well too, and there's all this uniqueness in between there that it allows for a place for everybody, right? Which I think is really really great. So your question, what when do things like kind of start to break, right? And what are some of the causes there? And I think that oftentimes, like, what I see is really like an underlying factor to a lot of it is lack of really like documented and structured processes, right? Because it's kind of like, all right, we're getting this thing going, and yeah, like, let's just figure it out. And then all of a sudden, like, and there's a ton of 3PLs like this, which is pretty incredible, is like all of a sudden, like, they have this client that just grows, right, and like
Yeah.
explodes, or like they're lucky to land like a larger client, and it just like pushes them into this whole other world. And like, in the 3PL world, it's kind of like, okay, well, I can't stop shipping, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, I can't just
Absolutely.
like, I can't shut off for 2 days and just be like, all right, well, let me figure out my processes and
Yeah,
how I'm
you're
going to do
fired by
this, right?
that
Like,
time.
yeah, yeah, the brand is like,
Yeah.
why aren't we shipping? Like, what's going on, right? Like, we thought you knew what you were doing. We're hiring you as the expert to ship for us,
Expert.
right?
Yeah.
So there's like, that pressure there to do that. But I find that, underlying factors are certainly like the lack of documented or structured processes that will help you scale, right? Because it's one thing when you got a couple people in the operation, and you can figure it out, and they're early with you, and so they know like these things, right? But then,
Yeah.
as we know, right, the more volume gets added, like, we need more people to be able to tackle that. We need more people to be able to pick, to pack and process and do all these different things. And if we cannot bring them in and make sure, like, their processes is in place that they can mirror and be able to follow those steps, right? That's where a lot of those things start to fall through the cracks, right? And then it's also kind of the leads into what I would say the second thing, like one of the challenges is to maintain quality, right, as we're scaling as well,
Absolutely.
right? The more touch points we have, right, the more opportunities there are for things to go wrong, essentially, right? So not having those controls in place around it, like, I mean, you could do, you could have the fanciest technology out there, but like if your
Absolutely.
processes and your controls like foundationally are not right, like it's not going to like fix all of that stuff, right?
Absolutely.
So I would say like those are two of the top things that I hear and see happen as well, right? And then it's kind of like, all right, well, we need to do that. And then I think, also my number three maybe is like a tie for for two things, maybe because I'm
You
I'm
can
thinking
you
of
can
two
go
more.
ahead and say
Yeah,
four,
I'm
no
thinking I'm
problem.
thinking of two more
All it,
things
all
here,
a,
right?
all it goes, right?
Yeah, I think one certainly is like also the people, right? And
Mhm.
like the leadership in a sense, right? Do you have people that have like that experience, or people that are ready to be able to take on that scale as well, right?
Mhm.
Because going from a smaller volume to larger
Absolutely.
volume, and that increase in revenue, as you mentioned, you got to be a strong operator to maintain that and maintain the consistency from a day-to-day basis. And sometimes, I mean, we see it very often, right? The 3PL is like, all right, well, I started this thing because, well, I had an opportunity because
Yeah,
my friend
that's
had a
classic.
brand, and then
Yeah,
like, oh, and then I needed some help. So, my other friend needed some work. So I brought him in.
absolutely.
But are we like really ops people? Like, not really. Like, we just kind of found ourselves in this position, right? And some people, they're geared that way and they can figure it out as it scales. But
Yeah,
but at a certain point, it's like, all right, well, we need to bring somebody in, like, to be a warehouse manager or be that ops manager to do that. So also, making sure that you have experience on the team that has gone
Mhm.
through that or has operated at a higher volume level when you get to a certain point is certainly a key as well. And then the other thing that I've heard a couple times, and probably more than a couple times, but when you get to the size where you're looking at expanding into multi-site, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's huge.
going into another building, especially like another state, right? Or another region. That's where I see, a lot of 3PLs struggle in making
Absolutely.
that transition. One, because it's a totally different market, right? From like a labor perspective, it's a different area. There's different regulations, there's different local laws and things like that
Mhm.
you may not be familiar with, and that can be hard to ramp up, right? I mean, it's one thing to do the initial building and be there, like, and see it from the ground up and all these things, but now it's like, okay, well, and kind of ties into the people thing too, is like, all right, well, now, I'm in New Jersey personally. So it's like, okay,
Yeah,
well, I have a site in New Jersey, right? And now I'm like, all right, well, I'm starting to get clients that want West Coast presence, right? So I'm going to
absolutely.
open
It's a
a
totally
building
different
in,
animal.
right? Open a building in California, right? Or Nevada or something, right? Well, it's like, all right, well, do I have people in place in New Jersey where I can go out and stand that up, right? Or do I need to find somebody that can do that for me? And, or can I trust them to do that, right? And that type of thing. So there's a lot of challenges around that. But I think foundationally, as I said, like, I think, process control,
Mhm.
standardization, for any operation, like whether it's 3PL or, retailer shipping themselves, like that is going to get you through those moments to be able to scale, right? Because if, my New Jersey site is solid on process, solid on
Absolutely.
standardization, I can take those processes, I can put those in my California building, and we have a great baseline to start from. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. And like, I was about to say the same thing. Like, when you
Mhm.
said about like multi-site and the challenges, it kind of ties back directly to your first point about processes. And honestly, I cannot appreciate more because I'm an industrial engineer, all about like processes and everything,
Sure.
and come more from like manufacturing background where it is even more important to have right processes in place. And I really loved what you said about like a lot of people think that okay, like we have this problem, oh, we are getting errors, like let's add a technology or maybe like something basic like barcode scanning, let's say, like yeah, like
Mm,
obviously barcode scanning will help with error elimination. But if you don't have standard processes, and like it is so surprising to see like variability in our industry, right? Like we like sometimes we don't know what our customer is going to ask us, right? Like as a 3PL, like the brand could say, oh, we have this sale coming up right before Christmas. We are expecting 20,000 orders in 3 days. Normally they are
mhm,
used to shipping like 500 a day. And you're also, oh, by the way, you're going to put a thank you card in each one of them, right?
mm,
So like there's so much, right? And like what like I always feel the same way, like what technology does is not like fix your process, it
mhm,
amplifies the problem. So you are same thing even when we talk about like automation, robotics, right? Like all these things and most technology is built around like processes. So if you don't follow processes, you'll fail even bigger. I feel like
yeah,
and and one of the other best thing, like I would like to comment on when you said that, like few people in the company like knows the process, it's not documented. Like
mhm,
the key term, like I would say like a unicorn employee, right? Like, oh, I
yeah,
have this supervisor, like he knows everything. What happens when he's sick? What happens if
mm.
he wakes up tomorrow and decides I warehouses are not sexy anymore?
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare. I don't know.
It actually happened. Like I was talking to a
Mm,
client couple days back, and he had an employee working for 15 years, and randomly, like next, like one day he comes in and says, I'm tired, I don't want to do this anymore.
mhm,
He just
yeah,
quit right on spot, right? 15 years is a long time, right? Not because he did not like the company, not because he got another job, he just was overwhelmed or whatever, right? Like there could be
mm,
100 different reasons, life changes, the list goes on. But like most businesses, like I would say, are not prepared for that. And I think it applies to pretty much every business, like you said, that's for sure.
sure.
I 100% agree with that. And so, let's say, like, these are some of the challenges. And, like, what do you feel like what stops, like, these operators from understanding these challenges? Is it because the knowledge is not out there? Is it because they're not involved? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things, right? I mean, some of it is, and I mean, I've heard a lot of these stories from 3PLs I've talked to and know, and I mean, some of this stuff moves so fast, right? It's kind of like you get like I mentioned earlier, like you get a client that's like relatively small, and then all of a sudden they blow up, right? And it's like, whoa, okay, like we got to keep up with them, right? Or like we're gonna lose them, right? Or you get the opportunity at a larger client, a bigger client that is bigger than anybody you've ever had before, and
Absolutely.
now all of a sudden, like, all right, we gotta just move quickly to be able to do this, because just I mean, just like any business, right? It's like, whoa, this
Yeah.
this could be like a huge catalyst in like the next phase of our business, right? Or like this is a game changer, right? So a lot of times I mean I see that as like it's like an all of a sudden, like, whoa, like we need to move like very quickly.
Hmm.
And then it's kind of like, all right, well, because we move so quickly, like we forgot some of these things in between, right? I also think because there's a lot of 3PL owners that are like, they when they start out, and like they're the ones like doing some of the shipping, like to begin with and stuff, and then as they start to scale, like like any business owner, it's like, okay, well, when do I step back and focus more on like growth versus the day to day? And it kind of goes back to what I was saying around like hiring the right people to be able to help with that scale. Or am I so like in the weeds that like I can't see like the greater picture and the actual kind of strategic problems that are happening, and not address them, right? I think I mean it's hard to do, especially when things move quickly like that.
Yeah,
So I mean, those are some of the things I think I see there. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's tough because it is a competitive environment for sure. But I also think that you can find like great kind of strategic and not slow is probably not the right
yeah,
word, but like more thoughtful like
balance.
growth by making sure like you've defined kind of your uniqueness in the market, and you stick to kind of like what your specialty is. And I think that's also one of the challenges. You've probably seen this
Yeah,
too, Vic, right? Where like companies like this is our specialty, but then all of a sudden like there's a client and the client's like, well, we do this large amount of volume, but it's like totally out of the scope of like the normal client we would take. But it's like ooh, volume, right? Like
yeah,
that volume is like tasty, and then it's like,
yeah,
and then you bring them on, and it's like, oh well, it doesn't work out right because it's like, all right, well, we're not geared for like that type of product or customer, whatever the case may be there. So yeah, I think those are some of the things I see in that
yeah,
in that
absolutely.
field.
Like,
Yeah,
like I can like think of like thousand examples of those scenarios, like, where
yeah,
people go out of their ICP, which is necessarily not bad. I would say, like, okay, like to expand, we have to do it. But at the end, like, it goes back to your first point, and I'll probably keep on referring to it, processes and like, a plan that is very necessary. And classic examples are someone being in a B2B type of fulfillment and going towards like e-commerce fulfillment, right? Like those are
mm,
two totally different processes and
yeah,
different scenarios, right? Like comes with like a B2B order. Okay, like if it's delayed by an hour, it's fine, right? Like the LTL carrier can wait some time. But if you're doing like shipping like 500 orders a day for e-commerce, they like you cannot delay that, like by even like 10 minutes, the cutoff of FedEx or UPS to pick up. Otherwise it's delayed by a day, right? Like which a
mhm,
brand would not like. And this is just one challenge, but definitely. And I would say, like what would be like because the point you just mentioned is, I also feel, is very critical in this whole space, right? Like that problem of yesterday tomorrow, right? Like we think that, okay, like we'll do these changes, we'll set up processes or maybe change things, but quarter 1 comes up, we are thinking, okay, we'll do it. Quarter 2, we get that new client. Quarter 3, we think again. Quarter 4 is like busy season again,
yeah.
and like it just keeps on in that loop. Like what would you like kind of like share, like as like from the shoes of a business owner or operator, that how can they work towards getting that balance or strategy which you mentioned?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's going about it in kind of that thoughtful growth, right? I mean, it's very easy to, especially like when you're trying to grow, right? To like say yes a lot to volume, right? But I think like you got to be, and and sometimes that works, sure, right? Like sometimes you're like, all right, I drink from the fire hose, and I'll just like I'll figure it out later. And sometimes it smooths out and it works, but oftentimes that doesn't quite
Doesn't.
work because either like you're overloading, and then like you haven't scaled labor properly or scaled train labor properly to keep up with that. And now like you got clients that are like suffering from that because the quality's dipping and SLAs are dipping, and now you're losing clients or you're having churn, and then it's kind of like, all right, well, this is not good, right? So I think the key is like making sure that you're having that thoughtful growth, right? Like obviously we want to sustain the business, right? So I mean that's very important, but can we actually feasibly like take on more volume right now, or
Absolutely.
do we need to do like this improvement project first to make sure that we are actually opening up the capacity and having the capacity to be able to do that, right? And I think it goes kind of strategic long-term planning as well. It's like, okay, well, where do I want to be from a revenue perspective, from a volume perspective, but what do I need to do in between to get there, right? And what does that look like? So I think a lot of it comes down to data as well, right? And also understanding like, all right, well, this right now is like my performance numbers, my, average units I can do per hour, from a picking perspective, from a packing perspective. So, if I add this amount of volume, like what does that mean for me for headcount, right? Or, I can have, right now I have 5 pack stations, and that means
Yeah.
that I can output this many orders a day. And, if I need to do more of that, like, well, do I also need to add pack stations, more pack stations as well? Do I have space to add more pack stations? Like all those kinds of questions. It's like, all right, well, obviously, like, sales are often the founder is the one like doing the sales, like in the beginning as well. Like, they can go out all day and like, try and get volume out of the market and bring that in.
Yeah.
But then it's like, all right, we go out, sales in any business, right? Sales and marketing is like their job is to go and get customers, right? But then like the logistics operations of it is like, all right, well, we need to deliver on the promise that sales and marketing put out there, right? So making sure that like you're thinking about the whole picture, I guess holistically or overall, and making sure that you're being thoughtful about that growth, I think is the best way. I mean, where I've seen, a lot of 3PLs kind of face the challenge and then totally kind of revamp and rethink about how they're going
Hmm.
to do it, and then they come out of the other side like successful, right? To be able to do that, and a lot of times that, it's like what I described happens, right? It's like, all right, like volume,
Yeah.
to just keep stacking on top, like we'll figure it out, and then like it's like they get to a certain point, it's like, whoa, like, we have all these clients, and like we realize like this type of client doesn't work for us. We're just not good at this type of product, right? This one is super high touch, it makes no sense for us, right? And we're not even really like making that much money off of it, or in some
Yeah.
cases like, well, they have a lot of volume but we're actually losing money like on them, like it makes no sense, right? So I find like a lot of 3PLs kind of go through that, and then they get to a point where they're like, all right, like take a step back and look like, oh, what actually makes sense for us, and how do we start to cater more towards that, and also I think, just learn to say no more
Yeah.
often, which is hard, right, when you're
Yeah.
trying to grow a
When
business.
you're saying volume and dollars, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, this much revenue, right? But then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, can we sustain that too as well, right? So yeah, I mean, I think those are some of the things that I see there. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, I think like one of the really good points you mentioned about like, the capacity as well, right? Like
Mm,
sometimes people underestimate that, okay, like we are adding this volume, okay, like, maybe we can manage it, but what about like, any additional capital investment which will also be needed, right? Like
mm,
maybe they don't have that cash flow to invest in those extra like stations or extra equipment, right? Like there could be so many things, like obviously it depends on the volume. Obviously getting one pack station will not break someone, but using just that as an example, just like
yeah.
that planning part. And like I'm curious to know, like because one of the thing which you mentioned, like I also feel strongly about it, then knowing your cost per client is very
Mm,
important, right? Like
yeah.
which you mentioned. And that is where I see like, billing of 3PL is already complex, right?
Mm,
And the second thing which comes in, and right before this podcast, I was actually like reading this LinkedIn post by someone like about billing, and there was someone like who said that, oh, we are using Claude to like, do some our costing and everything. Like,
sure.
obviously there are so many new AI tools and people can be creative, but at the same time, like what I feel is for the broader part, billing is already complex for every 3PL
Mm,
client, right? Like you're charging by picks, UMs, all that, like value added stuff, like how long things have been and so on. At the same time, now, like, to get a true PNL per client, like, that is something which I feel is difficult for, like, a 3PL not using right tools. So, what are your thoughts around that? What are some things you have seen how 3PLs tackle that, or any recommendations you have around that? Because I believe that's a very important aspect which kind of helps them decide whether or not to say no.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, at the end of the day, data is kind of like the king here, right? I mean, you have to be able to capture that data, right? I mean, if you can't, what's the old saying, right? You can't manage what you can't measure, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, for
like
sure.
you have to be able to capture that data to understand that, right? And really look at that. And I think, I mean, it's interesting. Like, had a recent conversation, and somebody was like, the 3PL is like, it's like halfway through the month and they don't even know, like, are they on budget or they're not on budget? Like, where are we at? Right. And so that's like a huge miss from a business perspective. But, understanding that data. And I think, if you look at the way that some of the larger 3PLs who have been around
Hmm.
for a long time kind of do their data analysis. We did a really interesting live stream with Barrett Distribution
Hmm.
Centers. I guess it was the end of last year, on just how 3PL pricing works, right? Like, and they're very adamant about, like, there's no rate card, like there's no standard rate. Like, each client goes through like the analysis to see, like, okay, what are our actual costs? Because the thing is, you can have a standard rate, right? A standard rate card, but that means that, like, this product from this customer, you're going to make this much, but then this one you're going to make a little less, or this one you're going to make more, right? And then it's like, okay, well, how do you actually can have a consistent kind of margin in a sense, which is important for the business, right? And so I think, yes, it's easier, and maybe it seems like you get faster to the market, or faster to the race, right? Because obviously, typically one brand is looking for a 3PL. There's a bunch of 3PLs in their
Yeah,
inbox, like, hitting them up, right? So it's a bit of like a feeding frenzy, almost, in a sense. I'm sure you've seen when people on LinkedIn are like, oh, I'm looking for a 3PL, and it's like 180 comments later, and
yeah.
they're like, oh my god, my inbox, right? Like,
Yeah.
but like, thinking about that thoughtfully, it comes down to that data, right? And, like,
Mhm.
ask them for samples, right? Like, how long does it actually take you to pack it? How long does it actually take you to pick it? What does it actually look like when we store it, and how much space does it actually take up? Like, those things matter. And taking that data and then translating that into, like, okay, well, what's the actuality of our costs here, right? Because, I mean, you could have somebody do an amazing volume, right? And then you actually break it down and look at what's the actual cost around here. You're like, oh, wow, I'm shipping like 30,000 units a month for this customer, but I'm making like pennies, right? It doesn't make sense, right? And so,
100%.
yeah, so I think, harnessing that data, capturing it, and understanding, like, what are my metrics? Like, how much does it cost me to do a pick? How much does it cost me to pack? How much does the packaging cost me? Like, every little touch and step, like, you need to do that activity based costing to really understand, like, per order, per unit, what is this going to cost me? And then what am I going to make on it? And how am I going to sustain my business to be able to do that?
For sure, and interesting enough, my second episode is on costing, so which is on
Ooh,
next
stay
week.
tuned. Yes.
Yeah, Bob Rhines was kind enough to come on, so he talks about
Nice.
all that in IWLA. I'm sure you know him. But yeah, no, I think that's like, I think like the key takeaway I would like to highlight here, how you said, like, not having a standard rate card and every customer is unique. I
Mm,
think that's a very important point you made there, Kevin, from your conversation with Buyer Distribution. Because I'll give you a live example. This is just one of my client onboarded a new client 3 months back. They gave them their order volume, like, from based on shipments, that these are the number of orders we processed. Based on that, they quoted them like pick fee, all that, everything good. And now they are in the warehouse, they are doing it, everything going well. They invoice the customer. Guess what? Customer was considering a kit which was like combination of 2 to 3 items as one pick.
mm.
But 3PL did not ask, brand did not say. Now there is a dispute that, okay,
Yes.
oh, this should be charged like $2 when it should be six. So they're about like 150K,
Mm.
in deficit there. And
Difference. Yeah,
now
yeah.
they have this big customer, they don't want to argue with them, but they added more manpower, did everything. So I think like another important aspect is, like you said, how much space they will take. in your warehouse, how heavy the items are, any special packing needs, how many line items are per order, right? Like, so there are so many, I guess, like, is there anything like where we have to control lot number or batch number? That does add time to your process, right? uh, like, so those are, I think, like, very that's a very, very good point, that like, having each customer as a customized pricing approach and doing a detailed analysis, so that you're setting yourself and your customer for, like, success. Because
Hmm.
that also ties in, like, what I always say is, like, if we have a vendor, doesn't matter it's 3PL or anywhere, if I am going and hiring a vendor for myself, like, and they don't know their cost, I might, like, get a good deal, but that is good for a transactional type of
Yeah.
relationship. But if you're looking for a long term, it is very important to know that if there is a warehouse, let's say, like, in New Jersey, and one is quoting me like $10 for storage, other one is quoting 20, and third one is quoting 16. There's a reasons between this variability, right? And I think as much important it is for 3PLs to understand this cost and everything, it is equally important for brands and manufacturers to understand this as well. And like, because that will help them make that decision,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's interesting. Like you said, like, oh, they thought it was going to be $2 and now it's $6. I was just thinking, like, it's like you go to the store and you grab like a candy bar and the shelf says $1, and then you walk up to the counter, like, oh, actually, this is $5, right? And you're like, wait, what? Yeah, and obviously that creates, like, like tension between there, because it's like, all right, well, how do we resolve this? And, like, they didn't either, like, we didn't, as a 3PL, like, explain to the client exactly, like, how these
Mhm.
costs work. And a lot of times, brands, they don't necessarily understand, like, if it's their first 3PL, or maybe it's like their second one or something, they're new to this, like, I mean, you don't see very many brands that come from actual, like, supply chain operations people, right? So
For sure.
so they don't necessarily understand how all of that works, and now all of a sudden, like, there's so many different variables in the pricing, and we're trying to understand, like, well, how does this actually cost this, and how does this cost that? And obviously, there's like, unfortunately, there's reputation in the industry, like, where
Yeah.
3PLs, like, oh, well, they're just trying to have all these, like, hidden costs and additional things they can tack on, and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think, for the 3PL, like, it's like, all right, well, it's about education too. Like, you got to kind of educate the client, or the potential
Clients, yeah.
client, on, like, where the costs are coming from. And I see a lot of 3PLs that will, like, work with the clients and say, like, well, actually, like, as it is right now, like, this is the cost, but we took a look at this, and we did this thing with packaging for another
Mhm.
client. I think we could do that with you too as well.
Yeah.
And then, like, this would actually save you cost, right? And, like, work that out. So I think that's something that needs to be understood there as well. But that pricing, I mean, yeah, it's, there's no standard of pricing in the industry, right? It's like, everybody prices, like, differently, and some people do, like, an all-in price, and some
Yeah.
people do, like, all these, like, itemized pricing, which then gets, like, complicated. And
Complicated.
so it's very difficult, right? Like, to your point, it's like, all right, well, New Jersey, somebody's at 10, somebody's at 16, somebody's at 20. Like, it's like, the client's probably like, why? What's the difference,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's all, like, four walls of concrete, right? Like, so, like, what's the difference on the storage price here? But yeah, I think that's, like, a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, and, like, that's what intrigued me, because, like, before I got into 3PL space, I was kind of on the other side. I was, like,
Mm,
helping my clients in my consulting days, like, get 3PLs, right? Like, vet 3PLs, and, like, be in a 3PL, like, branch manufacturers. Like, I would be talking to, like, the three warehouses, and they're, like, literally next door, like 10 minutes apart from each other, and their
sure.
pricing is off by 25-30%. And this was early in the days, and, like, I didn't, like, spend much time to understand and go into weeds of it. But as I spent more time, I realized, like, that why it is like that, because it is hard to sometimes even articulate their exact cost, right? And
Mm,
like you said, like, some of the triples assume that they're, like, the brands have already knows everything, right? Like you said, like, but most brands are, they don't come from supply chain or warehousing background. I mean, I remember, like, this was 5, 6 years back. I was talking to this lady. She worked as a front desk associate, and just because she could not find a cat toothbrush for her cat, she started a cat toothbrush brand, and that was like doing about $1 million a year. And
Yeah.
now she's looking for a software, looking for a 3PL. She
Mhm.
does not know what to do, right? Like, it just happened. Like, apparently no one was selling toothbrush at that time. But it is very interesting to see, right? Like, how a lot of these brands are made, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes, like, they don't start, like, same way, like, you started the podcast in thinking you're doing it 7 years. A lot of brands start like that too. Like, like, I think there is a need, let's do something, and something
Mhm.
happens. Now they don't know anything, don't have anyone to help them. And I feel that is one thing what you said, like, was also could be a good like, a key takeaway for people tuned in, is that, like, if 3PLs take that effort to educate the brand, especially, like, the newer brands, right? Like, because they have potential to grow, that could be a big value add which they can give to the community as well. I feel like.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because I think it is. Like I said, I never thought about brushing a cat's teeth before. But it's interesting. And obviously, there's demand there, so there's people that have thought about it. But yeah, very interesting product. But yeah, I mean, I think there is like an education piece, right? And you see, like you said, like it's like somebody just has a random idea that pops into their head, and the thing, I think that's sometimes never doesn't get talked about or often is like, all right, well, somebody has this idea, and like, does it have legs, does it not have legs? And sometimes, like, there's inventory gets sent to a 3PL, and it doesn't work out, right? And then that inventory gets stuck, and now the 3PL's got to deal with it, and all these things, right? So there's a lot of I think on the 3PL side, like there's certainly education that needs to happen for the brands and the clients to, like, okay, well, how do you really work with the 3PL? How do we work, and how do we help you grow and, make this a successful product by supporting you from like the infrastructure perspective and the logistics of it. But then I also think that, there's a bit of a gap maybe in the market from
Mhm.
a brand side, because I see oftentimes, like, if I mean, I've had brands like reach out to me and ask, like, is there a 3PL you would recommend or something like that, and I think that the brand tends to think that, like, they have like the upper hand in the
Mhm.
relationship, right? And like, and they should, like, and they're doing like, 50 orders a month, which, like, in the grand scheme of things is like, great for somebody, like, starting their own little business, right? But like in the grand scheme of things for 3PLs, like,
Yes.
that's like a lot of 3PLs are like, I don't want that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
like, a lot of
you
them
know,
will say no, like, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, but they think that, like, oh, well, I have business, right? So any
Yeah.
3PL must, like, would be, lucky to have me, right? And I think that's like something skewed that's not necessarily so much out there in the
Mhm.
industry, right? Like, and I think, obviously, like, brands or 3PLs don't want to, like, market as like, hey, we don't want you,
Yeah.
like, little company like that. You just kind of started knitting something in your room and you're selling like 20 of them a month or
Yeah.
something, right? Like, but I think that's like one thing too on the brand side, where it's like, all right, you got to understand, like, where are you at? And like, in some ways, like, the 3PL is like, yes, you're going to, like, pay them, but the 3PL is also kind of like taking a risk on you, right? Because they're like, well, we see potential here, because obviously they want the brand to grow, right? Like, the more the brand grows with them, like, they grow as well as a 3PL. Um, but it's like, all right, well, I'm going to allocate space for you. Like, I'm going to hold your inventory. Like, I'm going to communicate with you. And oftentimes the early brands, like, they have a lot of questions, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of back and forth, even though there's not a lot of volume tied to it. So I think that's one thing, like, on the brand side, that, like, there should be more awareness around. Is like, hey, like, there's a ton of 3PLs out there, but like, not everybody is gonna be like, chomping at the bit to take on, like, your thing you just started, or your thing that, like, you don't even have any volume yet. You haven't even sold a a unit yet, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I need a 3PL, right? And like anybody would be, happy to take on my brand, right?
Or they should be okay, like paying like more cost to it, right? To like, it's just function of that. Like, if someone knows that, okay, like, because like there could be different scenarios. Like one could have like a small volume now, but like, maybe that is their second brand or something,
Yeah,
right? They know it will grow. And then, yeah, 3PLs might charge like, premium, at least like, good ones, right? Like, or
yeah,
at scale, like
like a
they'll
minimum.
probably
Yeah,
want to charge a premium. So as a brand, you should be ready to do that trade off. No, like I absolutely agree. And like, just before I move on to the closing point, like if you would have mailed
sure.
about the cat toothbrush, I'll send you like, this thing. Like, so there was this company, I was actually like, it came through my feed just last week.
Yeah.
So they made cat DNA testing kit. And I don't know, it got sold for like 100 million or something in few months. They were on Shark Tank. I'll send
100
you that
million. Oh
episode
my
after
gosh.
this. that was like, what?
Wow, wow, wow. Yeah. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I've heard of like on the dog side, right? Like
Yeah,
trying to
I
figure
have
out
to.
like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I got a dog that's,
Yeah, they had
a
a,
mix of all these different things, like trying to figure out exactly like what is it. But I mean, that's pretty incredible. I mean,
yeah,
people love pets, right? Like
yeah,
they
for
love
sure.
their pets. It's pretty wild some of the things that
Yeah.
people like spend money on for their pets. Yeah.
Yeah, I have more beds for my dog than I have, like, in my entire home. So, yeah, so like, we are nearing the time here, but like, I just want to like, ask you like two last things, like, and then maybe if anyone in audience, we have about eight of us, eight people watching us, if they want to ask anything. But so what would you say, like, there are some early signs, like, which you would say that a 3PL operator should be aware of, where they would say that, okay, they're about to go towards that breaking point, or like,
Hmm.
as they're scaling, they're about to break. Like, how can they know some of these signals or signs and kind of like loop it into like any key takeaway you would want to have someone from this entire conversation, and any action point they can do this week or next week?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that I mean, there's a few signs I think like where things are about to start to break, right? I think one is if you start to notice that like the warehouse is seeming like is getting disorganized, right? Or less organized than it was. You start to see things like either piling up or maybe like there's more of a mess than usual. It's not as clean as it typically is, right? I mean, that typically means that like, all right, like we're getting our capacity is getting up. Maybe we're starting to exceed capacity and people are they're not having time to like properly throw things away or like clean out locations or take empty boxes away and things like that. When you start to see that kind of like pile up, I think that's a indicator that like something is bubbling and we're getting to a little bit of a breaking point, right? I mean, that's kind of like a very very visual thing that you can kind of notice, right? I think you also kind of see, I think, or you can hear too, like that your workers, right, probably maybe vocalizing to you that like, hey, like we're getting pushed to the limits a little bit, right? And like that could be a potential breaking point because I mean, to your point earlier, like this person of 15 years, like all of a sudden they're like, I'm tired, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm done, right? And so you want to make sure, certainly, especially as you're trying to scale, like yeah, you don't want to get to that point with your employees where like they're like, you know what, like this is too much for me. Like I'm not coming back, right? And
yeah,
now it's like, all right, well, not only do I need to find more people to support the new volume, but I also have to replace this person too, right? So I think those are some signs of like the breaking points. And then I think the kind of takeaway that I would say is, to make sure, I think said it earlier, it's kind of like data is the
yeah,
king kind of everything, right? Like if you're going to scale, if you want to, be profitable, if you want to understand like, is this actually a good client, not a good
yeah,
client? Like you need to have visibility into that data and be able to understand like what are the actual numbers here, right? Like, what is actually happening from a number perspective? Is this sustainable? Is it not sustainable? am I making money? Am I losing money? Is this a client that like I need to fire? Right. Like,
Yeah.
because they just don't make sense on paper for me. Right. So that would be like my key takeaway is the data. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And like, your point about like listening to your employees and floor is like, I believe that is the key. And like, that is probably if someone wants to know something from this 1 hour conversation, I would say that is the key for sure. And like extension of that, I feel is that when you start seeing like floor to be quiet, like when you have morning
Mm.
meetings and everyone's like, oh yeah, everything is good. Like they can never be everything good in a business. Like it doesn't matter what business you're in.
Sure.
So if
Yeah.
your team members are not speaking, you're like about to fall off, is what I
Mm.
would feel like too. And yeah, and like like overall, I also feel like, and which like I'm guilty of, by the way as well. So I've been thinking about joining, let's say IWLA for like about 4 years
Mm.
now. I joined it this year. And I just felt like, there's so much potential in the community overall. And there's so many resources. IWL is one of them. There's so many others as well. And like what I feel is my conversations with most of the 3PL owners, like they're so much involved and busy in their day to day stuff. And they just don't feel that being part of the community will be valuable. So
Mm.
I would say like 9 out of 10 people I know, they don't like, people I work with, like they're not part of communities like IWLA. So I also feel like that is something which most people should do to get to know like-minded people, people who are in similar business, people they can find to help. Through these connections, they can find consultants who they can take help from. Right, like for things they don't know. There's so many resources out there. So I feel that is also very critical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. I think that, I mean, that is certainly one thing that I've found in the 3PL space that um, there's a very, very small percentage of like 3PL people that are not willing to help other 3PLs, right? And network with them, learn from each other, share leads even in some
Yeah.
cases and do that. And there's a lot of great IWLA is certainly one of them, but there's also like some great just like Slack groups and WhatsApp groups too, where I see people like all the time, like, oh, has anybody ever had this issue? Like, how do we deal with this and that type of thing? So I think it is a very strong community overall, and I think it's really worth investing in, trying to learn from others too.
Awesome. Great. Well, when you're in the time, if anyone wants to ask anything to Kevin, drop like a message in the chat. And after this webinar, we are going to, I'm going to send you like, our information, my information, Kevin's information. If you want to connect, Kevin, it's okay. They connect with you on LinkedIn or email, what you
Yeah,
prefer. If someone wants
absolutely.
to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best way for sure.
100%. Well, great. And Sarit, I just saw your message again. As you know, that this was my first webinar, so I was juggling between chat and also talking to Kevin, so I could not see it. I just saw it. So thank you for your congratulations, and appreciate you joining, and appreciate everyone joining. And thanks a lot, Kevin. I really appreciate your time. And this was not as like how I imagined. I was a little nervous, but like you made it comfortable for me. I appreciate that a lot.
You were great. You were great. Great first time, I will say. Definitely.
Yeah. I appreciate that a lot. So, what I'm going to do is, I one thing, Kevin, which I forgot to say is, like it's kind of like the webinar will end now, I guess. But like you'll see a uploading thing on top. So basically, like whenever it goes to 100%, then you can close the browser. But we can pretty much end the live streaming like now, which I'm going to
Okay.
do. So thanks a lot, everyone, again, and appreciate you all joining in. Stay tuned, and we'll probably see you all next Wednesday.
All right. Thank you, everybody.